Genesis. Again, picking up the story of Jacob and Esau as Jacob is fleeing the wrath of his brother Esau. I'm reading from Genesis chapter 28, beginning at verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a ladder set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And the Lord stood beside him and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from the sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Friends, we have been reflecting on the texts from the patriarchs and matriarchs of our faith from the book of Genesis the last few Sundays. And I have to be honest, I am frustrated every time I read these stories. This is the family God has chosen to bear his promised blessing to the world. And by the time we get to this third generation, the whole family is falling apart. How can this family bear the promises of God to the world when they are consumed by their own ambition, vengeance, and worse? Well, I've had enough of all their family intrigue, so I did what should have been done years ago. I called this entire family into my study this week for a counseling session. That's right, I brought the children and grandchildren of Abraham and Sarah into my study for an intervention. Isaac came into my study first. He is the only child of Abraham and Sarah, and I had to guide him to his chair since he was now blind. Given all that was going on in his family at the time, he was surprisingly cheerful. Perhaps, though, it was an act. Abraham, his father, had once bound him and raised a knife to sacrifice him. It was an act of obedience by Abraham, who had trusted that God would provide a sacrificial lamb in his son's place, as he did. But one has to wonder what went through Isaac's mind as he lay helpless while Abraham brandished a knife over him. Rebekah, Isaac's wife, came in next. She had a regal bearing about her, but one had to wonder about her as well. Was it also an act? Isaac, of course, had been the only son of Abraham and Sarah. And once they had sent his half-brother, Ishmael, away, Isaac was the sole inheritor of the property and the blessing of Abraham. But Isaac had twin sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau had been the elder son, though only by a few minutes. Both were the grandsons of Abraham and Sarah. But Isaac favored the elder son, as was the custom. Esau over the younger, Jacob, because Esau was a hunter who brought him wild game. Jacob, however, was the quiet sort who stayed close to Rebekah and was her favored child. And there is where the family intrigues got out of hand. Jacob came in next, trailing after his mother, and sat down next to her. Rebekah put her arm around him and began stroking his hair. Finally, Esau came in. He had not wanted to come to this meeting. He was angry, and who could blame him? Jacob had already connived to take the birthright from him and then had tricked his father into giving him the blessing. Jacob had stolen the blessing of God from Esau. Perhaps Esau had tried to warn his father about Jacob after Jacob tricked him out of the birthright. Maybe Isaac had scoffed and said, the birthright has been nothing because Esau, would receive the blessing. And through his descendants, God would bless all the families of the world. He would see to it. The only problem is that Isaac was blind. And not just because he had lost his sight. He was blind to the destructiveness of his favoritism of Esau over Jacob. He couldn't see what it did to the relationship between the two brothers or the deceptions it fostered in Rebekah. How can people be so blind in their relationships? How can we be so unaware of the consequences of our actions? Yet this pattern of favoritism that had led Abraham to send away his son Ishmael rose up again to divide blood brothers like rival claimants to the throne of a kingdom. One has to wonder if it will all end like a Shakespearean tragedy. Fratricide has already loomed large in the biblical accounts of history when Cain killed Abel. Can this intervention accomplish anything at this late date? Yet there they were in my study, the grandchildren and children of Abraham. Esau paced back and forth and was livid. He started calling Jacob a thief and a liar and a traitor, and could barely restrain himself from violent action. Jacob sat quietly, brooding next to his mother, who acted like a shield to his older brother's wrath. Isaac still seemed blind to the magnitude of the events that were taking place all around him. All that seemed to matter to him was to pass on the blessing. Perhaps Abraham's willingness to sacrifice him for the promise had left him unable to see what this blind devotion to this promise was doing to his own family. It was a mess. But Jacob only made things worse when he tried to tell Esau that he had not really stolen the blessing of God, but that God had promised it to him in a dream. Esau was so stunned by the audacity of this claim that he stood open-mouthed and stared at his younger brother in utter disbelief as Jacob continued. "No, really," he said, "I had a dream that angels were climbing up and down a ladder or staircase or something from heaven to earth." "Well," I interrupted, "that is encouraging. That's an encouraging image, but I had hoped to stop Jacob from continuing this line of thought. Yes, it is a beautiful image. The thought that heaven is not some distant, remote place from earth, but that angels are constantly interacting with the earth, bringing decrees of an active, involved God, is a wonderful dream. But this family was living a nightmare. In truth, they were falling apart, and I didn't think that sharing such dreams would calm Esau. But despite my attempt to keep Jacob from continuing, he pressed on. "And God told me in this dream that I was to inherit the blessing, and that through me, all the families of the entire world will be blessed. So you see," he said to Esau, "I didn't steal it. God gave it to me." He turned and looked at Rebekah. You know, Mother, just like that dream you had before I was born. That was it. Esau snapped out of that momentary stunned silence, and he lost it. Liar, he shouted, liar! Now, son, think of the promise, Isaac started to say, but Esau wouldn't listen. And instead, he grabbed Jacob by the shirt and he thrust him up against the wall and said in an eerily calm voice, "You might be able to fool our father with your phony acts and your phony dreams, but he can't live forever, and when he is gone, I will kill you. Do you hear me? I will kill you." And he threw him on the floor and started to leave the room. At that point, and I might add against my better judgment, I stood in front of Esau and blocked his exit. "Get out of my way," he said. "No." I said, "Sit down." He stared at me with narrow eyes for what seemed like an eternity. But eventually he did turn around. He sat back down and turned his back on the others. "Look," I told the whole family, "you came here for counseling. You came here seeking advice. Well, this is my advice. Let go of the promises of God. Abdicate, resign, or whatever you need to do to back out. It's a covenant relationship, so tell God you want out. Think about it. The promises of God are now killing you. What was once a blessing to your family has now become a curse, and it is tearing you apart." I turned to Jacob. "You have dreams of this promise making you a blessing to all the families of the earth? Are you mad? It has led you to steal from your own brother who now wants to kill you. You call that a blessing to families? No, you, all of you, have to get out of this business about the promises of God before it kills you all." I stopped and looked around at the family. They were all silent now. Isaac stared in the direction of my voice in abject horror. Rebekah stared at the floor and quietly shook her head. Jacob put his head in his hands and leaned forward. It was Esau who spoke first. "No," he said. "I don't know what will happen next. I don't know what I will do. But I would rather see the blessing," and he kind of stopped and nodded his head toward his younger brother, "in his hands than for it to pass on to others. And I don't know what will happen next either," said Jacob. "But we can't sell out." Isaac positively beamed at their response and stood to embrace his sons. But Esau stormed out of the room, and Jacob retreated behind his mother. Well, there you have it. Has the family blessing turned into a curse? Or is God truly at work in this family to bring a blessing to us all? Looking forward, it's hard to see how the blessing of God will survive in such a family. Will Jacob play favorites with his children and pass on the turmoil of his family to a new generation? Will someone somewhere in this family be able to forgive the sins of his or her parents and siblings and proffer forgiveness? One thing, though, is for sure. This family is in it for the long haul. They are not going to sell out or quit. you the one who will confront the sins of your parents or siblings with an intervention of forgiveness? Come by my study and we'll discuss sometime. After dealing with this last family, I think I'm ready for anything. Let all